We're talking today with Major Peter Newman of Battle Creek, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. All right, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and just to begin with, where and when were you born?
All right, I was born in Mount Prospect, Illinois, June 18th, 1980, to Jay and Barb Newman. My dad is an educator. Well, both my mom and dad are educators. My dad was focused on secondary education. My mom was early education. Mm-hmm. I have an older brother, Matt Newman. He's 3 years older, and a younger sister, Carrie Newman. Now Carrie Hatt. She's 3 years younger. We spent Mount Prospect is a suburb of Chicago. Spent the first several years of my life in the Chicago area. Then we moved to Colon, Michigan, a very small town. I went through my elementary school years in Colon, Michigan. Then we moved to Sturgis, Michigan, a little bit larger, right on the border of Indiana, farm town area. I graduated high school in Sturgis, Michigan, where I met my wife, Carissa. And Carissa and I started dating at the end of high school. Kind of funny, we didn't really like each other at all in high school, and then at the end of high school we ended up going to prom together, and then started dating after that, and dated through college, and got married shortly after college while I was in the Army.
Okay. Now, where'd you go to college?
I went to Western Michigan University.
All right. And at what point did you decide you were going to go into the Army?
Wow, that's it. You know, there wasn't any one point that made me decide that I wanted to go into the service. In fact, I didn't even know the Army until right before I actually signed my contract with the Western ROTC. I was talking to recruiters. I talked to a Marine recruiter and actually almost enlisted into the Marines. I talked to an Army recruiter and was getting close to enlisting in the Army before the ROTC offered me a scholarship, and I ended up going the officer route from the beginning.
Okay. So basically, as a freshman in college, you started that?
High school.
Or? Okay.
As a senior in high school is when I started talking with them. What really, I think, there's two individuals that I can probably attribute my decision going into the service. My grandfather, who died when I was younger, was in World War II, and I never really got to know any of the stories about what he did in World War II other than he was part of the air war over Europe. Mm-hmm. And my brother went into the Army before me, and he chose to do that from our conversations more for the scholarship and for the experience that it would give him. Whereas I think I joined partially for the scholarship to be able to pay for my college, but partially because I've done a lot of what my brother has done. I've always looked up to him, and the fact that he was going into the military and actually succeeding made me think, well, this is something that I could be successful in as well.
Okay. All right. So this is something that you've already kind of committed to this well before 9/11 happens or anything else like that.
This was 98, so 97 when I first started looking.
First make that decision.
Yes.
So that's very much, for your own reasons and so forth. Okay. Now, what sorts of training did the ROTC program actually provide you? So what are you doing while you're still in school?
Well, with the ROTC, we would go to one day, a couple hours for that day of training where they trained, basics in military courtesy, decorum for the first year, and give you some very basics in tactics, map reading, movement formations. So there was not really a lot of higher thinking in that in the initial stages. It was an introductory to the military, kind of to weed people out who truly don't want to be there. Now the second year they start focusing some more on tactics. You've got the military decorum down. And between my first year and my second year, I went to air assault school in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii.
All right. Now, you're doing this without do you get what amounts to a kind of basic training there, or have you done that in some other form, or where does that fit?
Nope. Really, as I went through the university, as I went through the ROTC, they slowly progress you on your knowledge of the military and basics until you're at the point where they commission you. Before you're able to be commissioned, you have we called it summer camp. It's a leader development training exercise where we go out to Fort Lewis, now Lewis McChord, and we go through a couple of weeks of they call it training, but it was more assessment. There was no train first and then go through an assessment. It was, you're expected to know it up front. We went through, we were thrown into leadership positions, and then we were assessed as to how we perform, and that went towards telling us what branch we were going to get and what component.
Okay. And what about the physical conditioning side? Do you just get tested on what shape you're in, or
3 days a week we would do physical training in the morning. That was not required until you were in your MS3 year, your junior year. Or unless you contracted. I contracted as a freshman, but I did not start pulling in a scholarship until my sophomore year, so I paid for my first year. I joined a cadet organization. They called themselves the Western Rangers, that focused more on developing physically and mentally, and focused more on the tactics and preparing you for the infantry world as opposed to the larger army.
Okay. Now, did you have kind of a cohort of guys that you go through with at Western and were together in the ROTC pretty much the whole time, or?
I had some friends from within the ROTC that I still talk with. Then I had some friends that were not part of the military. So it's I had two groups that I would spend my time in college with. My wife didn't go to Western either, so usually I spent most of my time with her. She went to Albion College, the guys that I would spend time with, I'm closer with the guys I went through ROTC with.
Okay. Part of what I was asking about a little bit was do you have a sense of why other people were going into ROTC?
Oh yes, the reasons were they were various. There were some individuals that were just there for the scholarship, and they knew that they were going to do their commitments and leave. There were others. One of my friends who's still in, his dad was a sergeant major. And he grew up in the military, and he knew from the time that he could start thinking that he wanted to be in the military, from when he understood what was going on. There were some that started out in the military, started out in the ROTC with me that didn't commission, partially because they knew that they didn't want to make the commitments, and others because they weren't physically able to. But yeah, it went. Probably about half of them were there for the scholarship. Some that were started out for the scholarship, it turned into something deeper for them before they commissioned. Others that started for other reasons, because they wanted to be part of the military from the beginning. Some of those individuals did not commission, while others did. So it's the full spectrum.
All right. Now, at what point did you have your specialization determined?
That was towards the beginning of my senior year. I was branched signal with branch detail infantry. And what that means is I start out at the beginning of my career in the infantry, and then I become a signal officer.
Okay. And for a civilian audience, what does a signal officer do?
A signal officer does all the tactical communications, radios, and does all the automations as well, all the computers, all the network. So any form of communication within, really any form of communication, they're in charge of for the military.
Okay. All right. Now, where are you in your program at the point when 9/11 happens?
I was in my senior year. I had already found out that I was going to be actually I knew that I was asking for infantry. I didn't find out until about a couple months afterwards that I was going to be starting out in the infantry, but that's what I had in the back of my mind that I wanted to go do. But yeah, we had already completed our LDAC. We were getting ready to start we were actually starting our senior year into the semester, and that's when it happened.
Okay. And how did you learn about it, and how did that affect you practically or otherwise?
Well, I had come back from my workout, and I was getting ready to go into my classes when I got a call from my sister to turn on the TV. And so I turned on the TV. I actually skipped my class because I was watching what was going on. Well, in the back of my mind, I was thinking through how this was going to affect me and my plans. Mm-hmm. Because at no point in that period was I even thinking about not going into the military. That just made me want to stay the course. I just knew that it would change what I would be doing in the military.
Because going through and serving in peacetime, you get to see the world in the Army or whatever, and it's a different kind of job from a lot, but in some ways it's still a job. But if there's actual war going on, that does change the game.
Well, there's always stuff that's going on. You're always going throughout the world. I knew going into it at some point it would probably require me to go somewhere that I didn't want to go to. But that was all part of what I was signing up for, and I knew that from the beginning. This just made it more real. This told me this is probably where I'm going to be going first. Mm-hmm. Okay. Didn't realize we'd be there so long, and that would take up about half of my career. But at that time, I knew that was going to be my first real experience in the military outside of training.
Okay, so you have the initial kind of dust up over 9/11 and the excitement and the frenzy, and then things kind of quiet down, get organized. And because you're not actually really in yet, you're still in school and still in ROTC. Did you finish your program on the regular schedule?
I did. I did.
Okay.
Well, somewhat. I had to go. I graduated in June instead of April. Mm-hmm. I had two final courses I had to take to graduate in June. So I consider it still on schedule because that's the schedule that I had planned originally. But mm-hmm. There were other people who had to wait another couple semesters after that. There were a couple of individuals from my class who graduated that following December. But
all right. But in the meantime, the Army is letting you just go and finish your degree and get ready. They can go on to the next stage.
Yes.
Okay. So you finish the degree in June and then go into the Army properly now. So you actually receive your commission at that point? Or?
Received my commission on June 29th of 2002.
Okay. And now that you're in, what do they do with you?
Well, in July, I went down to Fort Benning to start my officer basic course, which was infantry officer basic course. Went down to infantry officer basic course, signed up for some schools. I took some classes in combatives, and just worked out in preparation for my course to start. I was down for about a month in preparation before my officer basic course started.
Now, is that because they wait to have enough people in to fill a class?
Yeah, there's pre-scheduled classes. They all start at a certain point. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to just waiting around Michigan, I was already commissioned, collecting a paycheck. So they sent me down. I could sign up for schools and start prepping myself for the course, so I'd be more successful.
Okay. Now, the officer basic, this is sort of where you get more of a workout, right? I mean, they're actually getting you into field exercises to some extent and that kind of thing.
Yep. Well, preparing for it, I had to get myself used to the weather down in Georgia, acclimatize myself. I'd been running a lot up in Michigan, but my first time that I went for a 5-mile run down in Georgia, that was my first morning down there. I got down late at night, went out for a run in the morning, which included a hill that they appropriately named Cardiac Hill. Mm-hmm. So I thought I was going to have a heart attack because I wasn't ready for the heat and humidity. Coming out of Michigan, yeah, it was warm, it was summertime, but it was nothing like Georgia in the summer. So I looked like I climbed out of a pool after my run, and after the run, we would go, we do PT as a group, hold formation, go out for a run, come back, and continue doing physical training afterwards. And the last thing we do before they release us is 100 pull-ups. You can do as many as you can at a time, and take as many breaks as you need, but you have to do 100 pull-ups before you would leave to go do hygiene, get chow, and then come back. Well, that was very difficult for me after finishing the run. I finished it, and I was probably one of the last people there on my first day to finish up. It took me about a week to acclimatize, and then I was back to my normal self.
Okay. And beyond the physical conditioning, and once you actually get into the actual training course, then what kinds of things do they have you do?
They at the beginning, they taught you officership, how you interact with NCOs, with the other officers, your expectations as leadership, developing your subordinates, and how you should be looking at developing yourself. They focused on building, part of developing yourself is intellectual development as well. You should be looking at the military as a learning, as a profession where you need to continue growing. And then they got into tactics and infantry tactics at a higher level. The reasons behind how to lead soldiers through the tactics, how to make the decisions to determine what you're going to do. And then we would go out in the field, and infantry officer basic is different from most of the other officer basics, where you spend majority of your time out in the field living out of your rucksack. Mm-hmm. Which to me I loved. That was great for me. That's what I signed on for. It was to be a soldier as opposed to continuing to be a student.
Right. Just before you had gone in, I mean, did you do a lot of outdoor stuff? I mean, were you used to camping or things like that?
We do camping trips as a family. My brother and I, we love fishing. I like to do some hunting, and was not big into hunting until I joined the military. I don't hunt as much now as I used to when I was active duty, but it's enjoyable just going away from where everything is all built up out into where you don't have the noise and light pollution, and just being able to enjoy nature. To me, I've always loved that.
Okay. Now, I guess the people that you were training with, these would have been people who would have already been in or enlisted in one form or another before 9/11 happened, right?
Yes.
Because they're kind of like yourself. I mean, they had made the commitment, and then they got into you have to get to a certain stage before you can actually go into officer
Correct.
basic. So it's not like you have a bunch of new post 9/11 recruits coming in or anything else.
Not
like
yet.
That. What was did you guys talk about what you were going to do when you got out, or what kinds of things you were expecting?
No, out of training or out of the military?
Well, when you were in once you finished the training, so your training as infantry officers, it's like, what are we going to get into?
Well, some of the actual training that we had some of the veterans already coming back from Operation Anaconda and some of the other situations that were already arising throughout the world, and we actually had some individuals come in and tell us about what they were. About what they've done. So it set the mood for the rest of the class, and it let us know what we were getting ourselves into. So it was always in the back of our mind, but were we always talking about it? No. We're all the conversations were more towards what's your background? Do you have family, girlfriend, whatever? Getting to know each other more. If it's in the back of your mind, you don't always have to talk about it.
Okay. Now, was this group a pretty diverse one?
It was very diverse. We actually had international officers in our class as well. We had a major from Egypt. We had a lieutenant from Turkey and a lieutenant from Greece, which was very interesting because they were in the same platoon. So we had international officers there. It was very interesting. I had a lot of very good conversations about Islam and about the Middle East with a lieutenant that I met from the United Arab Emirates, and really opened my eyes as to what Islam really was. Growing up in in southwest Michigan and farm country. I never really encountered that until I was down at my officer basic course. I took advantage of realizing there are people from different cultures while I was there to get to know them and learn about their cultures. I don't think everyone did that. I've always been very curious and wanting to learn new things. I've always been curious about cultures. I had a lot of interesting conversations with that soldier from the United Arab Emirates.
And did that give you some insight that paid off later when you actually could go into
It actually
Afghanistan?
did. It actually gave me some very good insights. It helped me baseline myself, realizing that where we're going is full of people as opposed to full of enemy. At the beginning, going in, you're trained. We were trained pre 9/11. We haven't, at this point, we hadn't started focusing on counter-insurgency. We hadn't encountered the insurgency yet, truly. So we're focusing on force on force. We're trained up on the old force on force model of U.S. versus Russia, or the Russian stand-in, because in the training you never say we're going to war with Russia. It's this organization that's got the same capabilities as the Russians, same type of naming convention as the Russians, but they're not called the Russians. Same thing with the Iranians. So the force on force training going up to that, you're taught, essentially you're going to go and you're going to defeat the enemy. We're going to go and do our job as the infantry, as General Patton would say it, and this is one of the quotes that was thrown around a lot when we were training by a bunch of the other trainees, was the purpose of war is not to die for your country, but to make the other bastard die for theirs.
Right.
Okay, so that was the mindset that we were going into. And talking with especially this United Arab Emirates soldier, I started, it put that thought in the back of my mind of, we're going into an area where there's people, that have the same hopes and dreams that we have. This individual wasn't truly any different than me. Yeah, he grew up in a different culture, but his goal in life wasn't too different from mine or my friends. He wanted a safe environment for his family. He joined his military partially because profession, to pay his bills, but partially to make it a safer environment for his loved ones. And getting into the back of my mind right from the very, very beginning that wherever we're going into, there's civilians, and majority of the people that we will be encountering down the road will be civilians. It just rebaselined me and made me think a lot more as to what I was going to be doing. So at that point, I started thinking beyond just the tactics and how to kill the enemy. It was about how to kill the enemy while being around a lot of civilians. And how would I want that to happen around my family? I wouldn't, but it woke me up as to reality.
Yeah, but if it did, it's sort of how would you expect a professional military organization to conduct itself? And beyond that, at this point, I mean, you're training for conventional war.
You are.
And at this point, you get into 2002, there is this Bush administration having its build up toward promoting the idea of going into Iraq. I mean, that will get a little bit more intense probably after you were in your school, but that starts popping up on the agenda as well.
And you'd be surprised as to how many conversations we're talking about Iraq as opposed to Afghanistan. We've got our soldiers in Afghanistan at this point. There's combat going on in Afghanistan. We all know there's a distinct possibility of Afghanistan. But all the talk at this point was, yeah, we're all going to Iraq.
Okay. Now, when do you finish the basic school?
I finished in December.
Okay. So now you really are getting into the point of that build up and all the arguments over weapons of mass destruction and that kind of thing.
Yep. I had one more school I had to go to before I was originally assigned to go to the 82nd Airborne Division. Once I finished my officer basic course, I went home for a little bit of leave, and then at this point I was engaged to my girlfriend, my now wife, and we're going to be getting married over the next summer. I signed up for Ranger School, and I went to Ranger School. I did not finish it because that was my first service-connected injury. I actually got plantar fasciitis that is still with me in both my feet, to the point where my fascia wouldn't stretch anymore. They would actually tear away from my heels and create bone spurs. And that happened at the end of bending phase. And so because I was injured, they recycled me and held me and kept me to see if I would heal, and it wouldn't go away. I actually had to go to an orthopedic surgeon and start getting cortisone shots, and so they discharged me out of the Ranger School with the possibility of coming back. And I had every intent of going back to it as soon as I got past my injury in my feet. But that actually did not happen. I started on deployments, and at that point, I decided I've got better experience on deployments. I want to continue on my career.
Okay, so the issue with the feet keeps you from doing certain particular things you have to do with the Rangers, but in terms
Right.
of most of the rest of what you do in the Army, including going into deployments, you can still do that.
Well, I had to heal up first.
Mhm.
And when I healed up, I had the choice of going back to Ranger School or going to a unit that was going downrange.
Okay.
And at that point, I didn't join the military to go to schools. And that was down the road a little bit further there. It took me a little bit of time to, and my feet have never truly healed. I mean, I'm not on profile for it now. I've learned how to live with it. That's the first of many injuries. My wife refers to me as the youngest old man she knows. But that's the first of many injuries that I've received. Yeah, it's by the time they healed up, which was a couple years down the road, and I fully engaged myself in my career at that point, and have dealt with it. I was on profile to begin with. I spent some time as an instructor down at the schoolhouse after I left. I became a instructor and a company executive officer at the 211 Infantry 211 Infantry Battalion. That's the 11th Regiment, as an instructor. As the company XO in charge of all the logistics for the training unit.
Okay. And where was that?
That's at Fort Benning.
That's at Fort Benning. All right.
Yep, I was there for a portion of time while my feet were healing, and then from there, they sent me to a signal school.
Okay.
So after I was done with instructing, I went to a signal school, which is at Fort Gordon. Fort Gordon is right outside of Augusta.
Mm-hmm. Still in Georgia.
Still in Georgia. Yep. So from Fort Gordon, I went to a 10-week branch qualification course and at Fort Gordon, where I became a signal officer, and they sent me up to the 10th Signal Battalion. By the time I was sent to the signal course, I was able to move around without really many restrictions. I had figured out, the best ways of taking care of my feet and moving around with that. And then when I got up to a 10th Signal Battalion, I was back to running. I was made the executive officer for the Alpha Company, under probably one of the few individuals that I've truly looked up to in the military. My first commander down at 211 turned out to be my best friend. His name was Doug Sloan. He actually went to Western Michigan, graduated a few years before me. Got to know him pretty well down at Fort Benning, and then when I went up to a 10th Mountain Division, he came up 6 months later, and he and his wife and family moved in with me and my wife until they found a house about 6 months after living with us. And we became very close. Doug Sloan was probably one of the best officers I've ever known. So Doug Sloan, Mike Love taught me a lot about being a leader. That was my first signal commander. That was his executive officer. So Mike Love helped me get back into the shape that I needed to be in. Found out about my feet, helped me figure out some good techniques to stay on top of this, and And really, by the time I was leaving that company, he and I were doing 10-mile runs. I was able to do 25-mile ruck marches again. He helped me through some of my issues.
All right. And this unit, was it attached to a larger formation, a division, or?
Yeah, they were part of the 10th Mountain Division.
Okay. Was the 10th Mountain Division still in the U.S. at this point, or were parts of it deployed elsewhere?
The 10th Mountain Division is the most deployed division in the United States Army. When I joined, there were 2 brigades. There was a 3rd Brigade and a 4th Brigade that were being stood up. One of those brigades was always deployed. Really from the beginning all the way through, I believe they still have soldiers on the ground. They have always had soldiers on the ground in Iraq or Afghanistan. Many times 2 brigades at once.
Right. Now the division would have one signal battalion.
Signal battalion
and then
up front.
Splits into companies that go separately.
The companies would be aligned to brigades. But one of the very first things that I had to do when I joined the Signal Battalion, I was only there for about 6 months before the Signal Battalion went away, and the Signal Battalion, the Engineer Battalion, and the Intelligence Battalion all went away and became 3 different Brigade Special Troops battalions, one assigned to each of the brigades. And I had to help rewrite the MTO, the Modified Table of Equipment, that authorizes the personnel and the equipment. The very first assignment that I got, additional duty, was to sit on a work group and write what the signal company would look like that was supporting a brigade. And so those 3 battalions went away, and they became the 1st BSTB, 2nd BSTB, 3rd BSTB, and then later down the road there was a 4th BSTB that was established once the 4th Brigade stood up. So yeah, it was a very interesting time period. We restructured. We had to move buildings. So while we were restructuring, changing the personnel and the equipment that we were going to have, we were upgrading from the old system to a new type of system, the joint network nodes and the CPNs. So we went away from the old method of passing on information, the old networks, to a new network, while we're restructuring what the units looked like while we were moving and restructuring what the brigades looked like. We were moving $10 million worth of equipment for a company, changing out $10 million worth of equipment for a new $10 million worth of equipment, moving it across posts under a new headquarters. It was we humorously referred to it as the goat rope. Let's go to the rodeo, where we're going to conduct the goat rope.
All right. So you probably get pretty good at the paperwork after a while.
Oh, it wasn't so much the paperwork. I did get good at the paperwork, but it wasn't so much the paperwork as it was the management of the soldiers and the equipment and keeping account of everything where it was at. And it wasn't the paperwork as it was knowing who had their hands on it, who was trustworthy, and where it went, and doing inventories and staying on top of it.
Okay. Now, what's the time frame for this when this is going on?
This was 2004. From late 2003 into mid 2004. Right? Trying to think here. No, this was early to mid 2004 is when the transfers finished.
All right.
And then I spent a year as the executive officer of the new Charlie Signal, is what we called it. Charlie Company, 3rd BSTB, aligned to the newly christened 3rd Brigade Spartans, which I just found out has been, they've just cased their guide on. So it breaks my heart a little bit, because that's a brigade I've done my deployment with. And it's,
so basically that means that brigade has been sort of dismantled,
yeah,
back out of service
dismantled.
again. So
Yep.
pull up the flags and go on.
Exactly. It's all part of the no longer need the heavy rotations, so you need to decrease the size of the military because of the decreased budget.
All right. Now, as all of this is going on, I mean, we went into Iraq in early 2003, and then things start to go south not too long after that in terms of it being different from what the politicians had assumed it was going to be when they started sending people in. Now, are you guys following that carefully, or are you just caught up?
We are.
Stuff?
We've got sister units that are actually deployed at this time, where they're watching our sister units going down range and coming back. And in fact, when I arrived at 10th Mountain Division, my battalion commander told me, don't get too comfortable. You're getting ready to go down range. So that turned into, with the new restructuring, they had to restructure first before they sent us down range. So we completed the restructure. And I spent some time with Mike Love in the new Charlie Signal Battalion. And I was in there until around 2005 is when I left the Charlie Signal Battalion to join 132 Infantry, which is the battalion that, again, Doug Sloan was in.
Okay.
Yep. But back to the BSTB, that's probably one of the best lieutenant colonels I have ever met. He built that into a family. It's one of those, the soldiers would follow him to hell and back just for out of respect and love for the man. They were more afraid of losing his respect than anything else. Colonel Richard Kaiser, very impressive individual. He had a great impact on me and my leadership style. He was one of those individuals that once I got to know him, I told myself, yeah, this is who I want to kind of build my career off of.
Now, was it something you just kind of did all along? You kind of know what the officers do and what works and what doesn't work, and
you do. You learn from everyone you run across. This is what works. This is what doesn't. Even the bad officers, I've learned something from. This is how I'm not going to do it. The bad leaders. This is how I am not going to do it when I'm in that situation. Granted, the closer you get to that situation, you start understanding why they made some of their decisions. But there's some truly bad officers out there, just like there's some truly good.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, you're spending a lot of time just working with and dealing with personnel, trying to get along with them and so forth. To what extent did you sort of have to deal with enlisted men and the various kinds of problems or issues that they have come up? What kinds of things did you have to deal with during this period?
Well, I'm not getting into any names, but
No.
I've had run-ins with many things, And luckily, I had a very good first sergeant who taught me as well. Before Mike Love came in, my outgoing commander fell in the bad category. Luckily, I didn't have to spend too much time with him, but he was very disengaged from the unit. So coming in as the executive officer for that unit, I more or less had to take charge, and I actually had to. I was the de facto commander for the unit as a brand new first lieutenant. For about almost 3 months before Mike Love came in. Well, this individual was basically commanded from a closed office, and then after he left and we were waiting for the new commander to come in, there wasn't a true change of command. So I was very happy when Mike Love came in, but I had to deal with soldier issues. I essentially assumed all the responsibilities for this captain, and I had to deal with most of the soldier issues. So, I get the phone call of so and so is in jail. You need to come pick him up. I get a phone call on Friday night from the police say he's in jail. And, after the first time of dealing with it, I talked to the first one. I said, "Oh, well, next time that happens, let's take care of it together." So I got the next one. So I called up first sergeant and said, "Okay, just tell him you'll be there Monday morning to pick him up." So that's what I told him. Then First Sergeant and I both went down to pick up the soldier from jail together, and I signed for him. And this is at the Provost Marshal. It's about a mile and a half away from where our formation was. And soldiers walking out to get in the First Sergeant's vehicle. And First Sergeant yells at him and says, "What do you think you're doing?" "Well, I thought you came to pick me up, First Sergeant." "No, I came to get you out of jail. You need to get back on your own." And so that mile and a half, we're driving behind him while the soldier's walking down the road, and the first sergeant's yelling out the window at him, "You have half an hour till formation. We better not be late. You better pick it up." So I learned, you know, some disciplinary techniques from that first sergeant. I leave those techniques to the NCOs. You don't need to see an officer doing that.
Yeah.
Was that kind of again baseline me as to expectations. You know, we're not there to babysit. We're not there to hold hands. We're there to make sure that the soldier has everything that they need in order to perform their duties.
Right. So soldier issues, a lot of that was kind of the young kid doing something stupid kind of thing?
Yeah, I've seen everything from, you know, DUIs, domestic disputes to assault with a deadly weapon. When I took over as a commander down the road, I saw a whole lot more. I had to deal with everything from, I had people who go on the sex offender registry to, I've had to deal with a lot of different things. You know, soldiers are people too. You have good soldiers, you have bad soldiers. Some of the good soldiers can make bad decisions. It's your job as a leader to identify, you know, what they need in order to be successful and provide and put out the right face that the public needs to see from, you know, the professionals who are supposed to be defending them.
Okay. Now, having finished with the signal unit and so forth, you go now into a regular infantry battalion.
Yes.
Are you still doing signal type work for
Yes,
them?
I went in to be their S6 officer. S6 is the communications officer for the battalion. At this point, Doug Sloan is the commander for the Bravo Company, 132 Infantry Battalion. This is a battalion where I keep in contact with most people from active duty from this battalion. It's 132 Infantry, the Frozen Chosen, the Chosen Battalion, the Queen Zone. This is what I identified most with out of all of my active duty time. I spent a year and a half in Afghanistan with this battalion. Went through a lot of hard times with my brothers from this battalion, and it's who I identified most with.
All right. Now, how long was it between the time when you joined the unit and when you actually deployed to Afghanistan?
A couple months.
Okay.
I came in from introducing myself to the soldiers to when we actually went downrange. It was just a couple of months. I went in October and we deployed in January.
Okay. Now, at this point, are they doing specialized training and gearing up to go to Afghanistan?
They go through. There wasn't any ramp up aside from the planning ramp up. This battalion, you know, I'll go out on a limb and I'll say this is the most deployed battalion in the 10th Mountain Division. They were always gone. There's a lot of very key individuals that were part of this battalion. You know, Colin Powell was part of the 132 Infantry Battalion. You know, there's a lot of pride in the history of that battalion, and there was a lot of pride within the battalion as to their readiness and the capabilities of the soldiers, and it's well-founded pride because the battalion was thrown into a lot of tough situations. Battalion was in Fallujah. Battalion was I'm sure you've heard of. You've heard of Restrepo. That's the battalion that was out there before the 173rd went into the Korengal. They're the ones that established that footprint there that the 173rd went in. That was during my time period with them. So they've gone through a lot of stuff. You know, it goes back to World War II, Korea. They were, a colonel from the regiment got the Medal of Honor for fighting the rare fight on the drive back to the 38th. And, so it was, there's a lot of pride in that battalion. So there wasn't any special train up to deploy. They just continued the training that they were doing.
Now, had that unit already deployed once before?
Multiple times.
Oh, but so I guess because now you're getting, because you actually deploy very beginning of 2006. So we've been in Afghanistan for 4 years or whatever already. Yes. So as well as in Iraq for a couple. So they've already had a couple of trips back and forth.
Yeah, this battalion it had a rotation of basically around a year deployment, come back for a year, then go for a year deployment, then come back for a year, then go for a year deployment. So it was one on, one off for this battalion. And that one off included EIB Expert Infantry Badge Training Assessment, rotations to the National Training Center, the Joint Readiness Training Center, sending observer controllers to those training centers, and a lot of field exercise. So when they were back, they were only spending a month or 2 months with their loved ones while they were back before they deployed.
Yeah, it's quite a bit different from what happens, say, with a mobilized guard unit or something like that, where
Right.
you have to do a lot to get them ready to actually get up and go. Or even some of the Marine units that before they go into Iraq would have to get the desert training or something.
Right.
You people had trained for this kind of anyway, and did you have a substantial cadre of people who'd been on one or more deployments?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. A lot of the key leaders this was their second or third deployments already by 2005.
All right. So now, okay, you head off to Afghanistan. So how does that play out in terms of getting you over
Well,
and stuff?
Family came. We had a ceremony to go out the door, farewell ceremony, and then we went out the door to Afghanistan. Got on the ground, realized that who we were supposed to be replacing didn't exist. So I guess let me back up a little bit for our preparation. We knew that we were not going to be replacing anyone. There was no preset equipment that we were going to be falling in on. So we spent all this time trying to get the equipment that we needed to go downrange. Everyone is in the mindset of you deploy and you replace a unit. You replace a unit following on their equipment and you do their job. Well, we knew we weren't replacing anyone, but it seemed like no one was listening to us. I'm sure that there's their own story for individuals, but we spent our time trying to identify equipment to bring downrange. As the S6, I was looking for communication equipment. I knew we were going into the mountains, so I was trying to get tactical satellites and high-frequency radios that could talk over the mountains. And I ran into stone walls everywhere that I went. I actually had to become, a campaigner and work a few different individuals in order to get the equipment. If I got told no by one person, I go back to the same office and I keep going back to different people until I got someone to say yes that they signed the equipment over to me. I had to play that game a few times before we got what we needed to go downrange. And when we got downrange, I realized we still didn't have enough equipment, so that's where I did my stop off in Iraq and a couple other places. I hopped some flights, got approval for my Battalion XO, and went out and got my hands on additional equipment. I'm not going to go into where all I went on that, but got the rest of what we needed because shortly after arriving, we were going into Operation Mountain Lion.
Before we get into that, just physically, how do they move your battalion from the States to Afghanistan?
Well, there was a flight. There was contracted flights that would fly us into Manas. So our battalion would all load onto a flight. About 600 soldiers in that infantry battalion. And we take that flight into Manas, where we get onto a C-17 and fly into Bagram, and then from Bagram we got into another flight, another tactical flight, and flew into Jalalabad, and that's where we set up our headquarters.
Okay. Now, are all three in Afghanistan?
No, Manas is in Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, because that's a stopover on the way
Yes.
over, because it's a very long way to Afghanistan.
It is. We actually had several stops on the way over. We stopped in Ireland, then Germany. And when we stopped in Germany, there was some problems with the plane. So they deboarded us, and we stayed the night in Germany. I'm trying to remember where we were because we went nowhere except for the hotel. We weren't authorized to go anywhere. No drinking authorized because we're already on deployments, even though we're in Germany. It had to control where everyone was because you didn't want anyone wandering off and missing the flight to go to Manas. So everything was all very controlled as we're going in the country.
Okay. And then Bagram is sort of kind of a staging area, main base near Kabul, is that?
It's north and to the west of Kabul.
But it's a
it's
place where
major.
a lot of large flights go in and out.
Oh,
stage out of there.
Yeah, it's the major. It's the major hub for logistics in that portion of Afghanistan. You have Bagram is the main logistics hub there. You have Kandahar is the main logistics hub to the south, and then you have Leatherneck, Bastion Leatherneck, which is main logistics hub to the southwest. But Bagram is what we went through.
Okay.
It got very frustrating later on that deployment because we always talked that if you were on Bagram, you weren't in Afghanistan. Because Bagram, there was truly no real threat to you in Bagram, and you'd start losing sight of where you were. And when you go back to Bagram for a refit, for a little bit of rest, Bagram was truly a place where you can go rest without any concerns, and people would almost forget what they were there for.
Which is maybe not so good when you go back out in the field again.
Yeah, well, there's that, and the people who never left Bagram is that cantonment mentality. You know, we gotta go back to all the restrictive regulations and policies without realizing that it's very fluid out in the field. So I had to jump, if you're out in the field, you jump through a whole lot of hoops trying to get what you needed because of the policies that were written by the people who never were in the field, and that was very frustrating. I proudly refer to myself as the most hated signal officer in Afghanistan because I burned every bridge with the rest of the signal community while we were there trying to get what we needed. And I take great pride in the ability and what me and my soldiers were able to provide. They told us it was impossible to set up a voice network over the Pesh River Valley, and I set up a permanent retransmitting network where you can drive down the Pesh River or walk down the Pesh River and be able to talk from Asadabad to Camp Blessing, which were at two distant ends, and down to the Korangal. Took great pride that we were able to do what everyone else was telling us was impossible to do. Our soldiers, we did not have all the unclassified networks and phones because we were out doing patrols that a lot of the individuals that back at Bagram that could call home every night had. So we were using the Thuraya phones, the satellite phones, and using phone cards to allow the soldiers once a month to be able to call their families. And I got in trouble for that, and I had to go into Bagram to argue for more phone cards. I was told by a lieutenant colonel that no, and that we were using them for unauthorized use, and got in a little bit of trouble, but got the cards that we needed by basically standing in front of them and saying, well, then you go move out of your comfortable hooch, sleep on the ground for the next month. Don't use any of your electronics in your office to call home. Don't eat at the hot chow. Just eat MREs once or twice a day, and don't take a shower or go do anything fun. And do this in a place where people are shooting at you. Then I'll listen to you tell me that my soldiers can't use that. And his boss overheard me, a captain, yelling at a lieutenant colonel outside of his office, and stuck his head out and said, "Give him the." I almost said the wrong word, but give him the cards. But yeah, I burned a lot of bridges there too. So it's my job got harder and harder while we were there because in the back of my mind, everything that I was doing was for, what can I do for the soldiers.
Okay. And did you have good backup from your own commanders? And
to a point, yes. I had backup as far as they understood what I was doing. They knew what they wanted. They just didn't know what it entailed, and it was on me to go make it happen. So I would go fight the fights that I needed. And when I ran to a brick wall and was started getting bloodied by that brick wall, but knew that I had to take care of the soldiers, that's when I got my commander involved, and then he would raise it up and got into the my boss is bigger than your boss type thing, where eventually, if we follow the green tabs are the commanders, battalion commander, brigade commander, division commander, theater commander, talking about taking care of soldiers. Usually you win out.
All right. So let's back up a little bit now. So you go to Bagram, you go to Jalalabad. Now that's in the northeast, or?
Yes, it is. We're almost on the Pakistan border. In fact, we had soldiers that were right on the around the border in the Khyber Pass.
All right. Now, what is the actual mission you're going into? So you're not replacing anybody, but now what are you doing?
Well, we were replacing Marines. We were replacing I believe it was the 1st Marines, the 1st MEF. But they had what was called N2KL. It was it was Nangarhar, Nuristan, Logman, and Konar.
These are 4 provinces?
4 provinces. An area the size of the state of Vermont. That was in the northeast, along the Pakistan border. And we basically covered that whole area with a 600-man infantry battalion to defeat the enemy. That was our mission.
What had the Marines had? Did they have a battalion, a regiment, or?
It was a battalion at that point, but the Marine battalion was about 300 soldiers larger than ours. But the other thing to keep in mind that nobody was looking at was the fact that the Marine equipment cannot be transferred over to the Army. It's two separate branches. Marine equipment is Marine equipment. They had to bring it with them. So all the stuff that the Marines purchased had to go with them, and we had to repurchase or find equipment from the Army. And so everyone kept saying, well, get the equipment that the people you're replacing are leaving behind. Well, that works if you're replacing an Army unit, not if you're replacing a Marine unit.
So that would be something that increases the frustration kind of going in. It's there, but you can't have it.
Extremely. It's especially knowing that we have this major operation over our heads coming up in about a month. And we have a month to get everything that we needed and to get everything set up. And so, yeah, me and a couple of my guys just went out and got our hands on everything that we needed and brought it all back. Took a couple weeks to do that. Then we came back and we were getting the vehicles ready. Little did we know that vehicles weren't going to take us too far in that area. But getting the vehicles ready with some systems that we were going to be using. And right before, about 48 hours before the start of the mission, we got new systems in. So we had to go through all the vehicles and replace them with this new system. The new system, when we got it, and I can go into it, but it didn't have all the parts, and we didn't realize it didn't have all the parts. So we got them all installed in the 24 hours, but then it wasn't working right. So we had 24 hours to go through, figure out what would make them work, and make sure all the vehicles had them working. We made it. We made it work. No one slept for those 48 hours. There were 2 times on this deployment where I actually had a medic come up behind me and give me a shot that knocked me out to make me sleep, because I had one period at the beginning of that deployment where I was up for 5 days straight without sleeping, and I actually wasn't making any sense at that point. And someone made a medic go put me down. And then after this, I was getting ready to go into my next priority right after this, and my NCOIC, Master Sergeant Peters, love that guy, but he was trying to talk me down and just got fed up and went and grabbed a medic and had him go up behind me and give me a shot. Didn't realize it happened until I was out. Woke up 2 days later because I was that tired. But yeah, Master Sergeant Peters is a great guy. Always took care of me.
Okay. So what's the nature now of this mission or whatever that you were launching? This is your Mountain Lion. Let's see this.
Operation Mountain Lion.
Mountain Lion. Yeah. So what was that?
This was to get a foothold in the middle of where we refer to it as Indian Territory, but in the middle of where the enemy was, and to advance our influence. Our battalion commander, Colonel Cavoli, that guy was very, very intelligent. Didn't always agree with decisions that he made, but never really questioned them either, because the guy was very intelligent. He understood coin before it was pushed from higher echhelons. And his plan from the start was to essentially set up areas where the idea behind it would be we'd go to an area where there'd be great enemy influence. We push out the enemy the enemy influencers, but then we go to the village elders and we say, okay, we got rid of them for you, but here's what we need to do. If you keep them out, you're going to get our support. We'll bring money into your area. We'll build micro hydro, schools, wells, whatever you need. Build the roads out there to you. But if they come back, it's on you to push them out. Because he knew that we weren't going to be able to win it by being the Americans, and we had to get the buy-in from the locals. Some places they didn't want to cooperate. Other places, when they did cooperate, the standard of living went from, an annual income would be anywhere from $100 a year to, upwards of $300-400 a year. We'd triple, quadruple the income in an area. We'd build schools, we'd build micro hydro, bring electricity to the area, we'd build roads, dig wells with the engineers that we had or contracting money that we had, and improve their living in the area. And as the surrounding areas would see that, they'd start saying, well, we really don't want these guys here, we want what they have.
Right. And you had mentioned at the beginning of that discussion the term COIN, which I guess is counter-insurgency.
Counter-insurgency,
yeah,
yes.
And that tactic, and it's characteristic of part of what was in the surge in Iraq, and the rest of the idea is find out what they want and what you can do for them to get them on your side.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you have to win them over.
Okay, this particular tape is about out, so we're going to... Okay, now we were talking about Operation Mountain Lion. You said the basic purpose of it was to kind of get into an area along the Pakistani border where the Taliban and friends have been very active and try to find ways to push them out. So it's going to pick up with that, describe a little bit sort of how the operation works.
Well, right up front, the correction on that is it wasn't so much the Taliban. At this point, they're kind of afterthought. There's other organizations.
There's a lot of other, because Afghanistan is full of different groups and factions who always fight each other anyway.
Exactly.
And so you have some of those.
It comes down to the point where even one valley has been fighting this other valley for thousands of years. They don't know why, but it could be you go dig a well for this valley and the other valley's shooting at you for helping their enemy. Then you go build a school for this valley and the valley you just dug a well for is shooting at you for helping their enemy. So there's so many different factions, but what we were out there to get rid of were terrorist and criminal groups. I'm just going to keep it at that without getting into who they were, but it wasn't all Taliban. They're more of an afterthought at this point. They've already been, for the most part, minimalized in the area.
Okay.
Operation Mountain Lion was a very large operation, the largest operation since Anaconda to this point. It was the Marine Battalion, 2 infantry battalions, Restrepo, which is a reconnaissance battalion. It's very similar to an infantry, very similar capabilities, and several Afghan Kandaks, Afghan battalions. All were involved in this operation. Essentially what happened was there was a cordon of valleys. The Konar Valley, the Pesh Valley, I say, sorry, but Konar Valley, the Pesh Valley, there were multiple valleys that were covered by vehicles, by companies that were mounted, while other companies were inserted in or moved into some smaller valleys towards the center, which was really the Korangal and the Abbas Gar. The Abbas Gar was the largest mountain in the area, and the Korangal, I'm sure most people have heard of the Korangal by now because of the movie that's out there, Restrepo, and the book. But we were going into that area, and this was the first big push into that area. We had units that were air assaulted in, which means that they flew in the back of Chinooks and they were dropped off on top of a mountain, kind of as a sudden assault in. The idea was that we set a cordon out to capture anyone as they're trying to, we call them squirters. They go out through the rat lines, I'm using terms here, but rat lines are little paths through the mountains that they thought were safe lines that we wouldn't be able to stop them on. And squirters are the individuals that would try to escape, squirt out of the engagement area. So that's what the cordon was there for. We go in, the infantry was going in with the Kandax as well into these areas and establishing a foothold, moving up through the valleys going towards the middle while others were being air assaulted in, kind of as a shock value to take them by surprise when they weren't prepared. Wasn't as successful in destroying the enemy as we were hoping for, but was very successful in establishing footprints. We established the Korengal outpost, which was to be renamed Restrepo several years, after we were gone. We established other outposts as well in Michigan, California, which was along the Pesh River. So we established the area. That was the main purpose of the operation was twofold: to defeat the enemy in the area and to establish our footprint. We were very successful in one, not so much in the other.
Okay. Now, as you're going in, how much resistance are you getting?
Not as much as we thought. There was resistance, there were casualties, but there wasn't nearly as much as we thought that we would see. Really, where the casualties started mounting was after we had established it and they started coming back in. And it's we did take some pretty heavy casualties during our time in Afghanistan.
Okay. In the beginning, essentially, they're the targets. You're coming after them. They don't know what you're going to do.
Well, they have an idea of what we're going to do, but they don't know where we're doing it.
And so it's harder. But then on the other hand, if what you're doing is you're establishing outposts and you're trying to stay in places and you're doing this work of trying to integrate with the community, then they know where you are and they know what you've got.
Yeah, the idea behind establishing the outposts is, Colonel Cavoli and I fully agree with this, as well as our other leadership down at the brigade level and lower. Was Colonel Nicholson, now General Nicholson, very impressive individual as well. The whole mentality is you're not going to win by sitting on a FOB, a forward operating base. That's where you go back to get a refit, take a shower, eat some hot food, call home. You're never going to win by being there because the locals aren't allowed in there except under strict supervision. So you can't win hearts and minds. You can't win over the locals that way. One of the reasons why the enemy was so successful is we go into an area and then we leave, whereas they go in, they'd stay, and yeah, the locals were afraid of both sides as to what we could do. We're armed men too, that could become very violent if we need to be. It's violent. I'm gonna talk philosophical real quick. To me, majority of the soldiers are not violent in nature. Vast majority of us are not. In fact, I joke around, but I fully believe this. There's only two types of people who want to go into combat. Those who have never been in combat before, and sociopaths. Because those are the individuals who have violence as part of their nature. The vast majority of the soldiers aren't violent by nature. They'll become violent when they need to be, when it's required. And the locals realize that the Americans can become violent. So we're almost as scary as the people we're going, that we're there to defeat. The difference is, up to this point, we would go and we would leave. And we were restricted by, we can't just open up and start indiscriminately killing. Whereas the people who were there to defeat, they go in, move into displace someone from a house and move in, and they could kill whoever they wanted with impunity. And so if you're a local and you have one person coming with all these restrictions who are going to come in and leave, even though they can become very violent and want you to provide them assistance, you're not inclined to assist them. You're more inclined to assist the person that's there for the long run and will kill you in an instant if there's even any, will kill you, your family, your children down to the babies, if there's any indicator that you're assisting their enemy. So knowing that, that's kind of why we went in and started setting up these outposts. You still need an area that you can keep your supplies, but never really stayed on those. You know, you defend them, but you'd always spend time out in the communities, and you get to know who is there. And the more you're there, the more they're going to cooperate with you and point out who the bad guy is. So that's a little bit of philosophy behind that.
Right, and that's, I mean, that whole discussion here, I mean, that's all, the scary thing in a way is that it's really echoes of Vietnam. And we learned, at least abstractly, a lot of those principles there, and then did not train them for a long time afterward.
If I can continue just a little bit longer down this path, I mean, Afghanistan as a whole, my times in Afghanistan, it's full of duality. It really is. Afghanistan is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. In the mountains of Afghanistan, you have, you know, very little noise pollution, almost no light pollution. You know, at night you can see the stars clearly. It's during the day you've got the blue skies to the white-capped mountains, the gray mountainsides, and to green river valleys with blue rivers running through them. Amazing. They're just beautiful. But it's also some of the worst things I've ever seen in my life too. Things that I don't like to even think back on. I did get help after that deployment. I came back and I had issues. I got help for it. I have a lot of respect for the Afghan people. You hear a lot of people come back about, and this goes back to my discussion about that soldier from the UAE. I'm going in knowing that they're people. I got to know a mullah pretty good and a trader. I got some good information from them. I'm not going to say any names because of the situation over there now. I don't want anything to happen to these individuals, but I considered them friends while I was there, to a point, because we're still at war, and you know you can't become too attached to someone from the area. But you know, I had a lot of respect for the Afghan people, a lot of honest, hardworking individuals that wanted to better their lives, but at the same time, very frustrated because you want them to be able to defend themselves. You know you can't stay there. You want them to step forward, but there's a lot of dishonesty, so much dishonesty. It's so frustrating to see it, everything that you build, and it starts by some culture to fall apart. So, you know, the average individual, I have a whole lot of respect for them. The people who would start gaining power, and with the culture of the power and the abuse of that, was so frustrating. So it's a land of duality to me. So it's but again, that in my mind, as we're going through doing our operations, going out to the locals, it's keeping in mind that you got to take everything with a grain of salt. You know, even the ones that want a better life and truly, deeply want to work with you because they want what you're offering, but they can't because they know you're not there permanently.
Mm-hmm. Now, from the perspective of the soldiers and the men you're putting out into these outposts, what are the dangers or the risks involved with that kind of strategy?
Extreme dangers with that, and that showed in our casualty rate. 600-man Infantry Battalion, we had 200 Purple Hearts. We had 20 killed, to include my best friend, to include several of my friends. It was probably the roughest time in my life there. Not only being away from the family support structure, but seeing the deaths of some people that were very close to me. So the danger was extreme, but the risk was worth it. The benefits that we could have gained had the strategy been followed beyond us, because we made a lot of ground while we were there. Mm-hmm. It was very frustrating watching it start to collapse upon itself after we left. You know, new faces come in. Mm-hmm. You know, again, I know I keep stepping back, but the problem with Afghanistan is it wasn't a one war from really 2001 through really now 2014. It wasn't one long 13-year war. It's 13 one-year wars is the problem. We go on rotation. You know, World War II, you didn't have this issue because soldiers would go in and stay for the duration. Mm-hmm. And they'd move around, but you had that continuity. yeah, individuals would change out, but the unit as a whole and the culture that has been fostered and the ideas behind it move forward.
Yeah, and you
Same
kept
thing
a
with
lot of
Vietnam.
the cadre of leadership. Actually, well, Vietnam,
Exactly.
though, had the issue of rotating personnel out.
Exactly. And the problem here is that we're rotating out entire units. So one unit might have been very successful, but the next unit coming in didn't see where it started and where it finished and how you built that success. You have a 1 month handoff where really about 2 weeks of it is them following you around, then you following them around. Can't get a lot of handoff of what you've been doing for the last 16 months in 2 weeks. So you can tell them I recommend you continue doing this. This is how we succeeded. But the new commander comes in, they've already got in their mind what they're going to do before they even get on the ground. They've been preparing their plans. A lot of it has been in conversations with you, but it's a whole nother mentality, whole different group of planners coming in with different priorities.
Isn't also a lot of it, though, with the strategy? It depends on personal relationships.
It does.
Yeah, they're the people that
It takes time to build those relationships with the locals. There's Pashtunwali. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with Pashtunwali, but it's how the Pashtuns live. The Pashtun, the largest tribe in the area. Many sub-tribes, just because you're Pashtun doesn't mean you're friends with other Pashtuns, but Pashtun, the Taliban were Pashtuns, but so was President Karzai was Pashtun. So largest tribe, but Pashtunwali governs how they live. Part of that was, it's a translation, but 3 cups of tea. 1 cup of tea. A cup of tea means you sit down with the local, have a cup of tea, a meal, and conversation with them. Essentially you invite them over for dinner, or they invite you over for dinner. You're considered an acquaintance. 2 cups of tea, you're considered a friend, of sorts. 3 cups of tea, you're considered family. So you don't really have the relationship built until you've had the 3 cups of tea with an individual, between individuals on the ground. And you've established that relationship. And they realize they can trust you and you can trust them to a point. I have to qualify everything with to a point. So you have to build that, and it takes time for them to understand your culture and you to understand theirs. And we have to do a lot more of understanding theirs because we're supposed to be coming in more educated, more prepared for the area. We're in their location, so we need to understand their culture more. Someone coming in fresh has not had that opportunity to immerse himself and learn, what's good and what's bad. Because by each valley it changes. So you have to know what works in this valley doesn't work in this valley, based off of personality and the historic culture. Sorry, I went off on a tangent, but to give you
that's
more insight as to the process behind this.
It's a very interesting kind of corrective to the way things would get viewed, say, from Washington, where someone is making policy, or even from one of those headquarters bases somewhere where it's, okay, we're going to send this unit to go this thing. There's a lot of other stuff that maybe they don't get. And on some level...
At the different echelons, the different policies at different echelons, I fully understand. It all starts with the national security strategy. All the way up at the top, the president and his cabinet sit down. These are things that are important to us. These are threats that are out there to it, and this is what we need to do about it.
Yeah.
And trickling all the way down to, this is the leader of this village, of this bande. This is a person, and this is their personality and how to deal with them in order to meet all those different policies above you.
Right. And just it would seem to me just to be a tremendous problem to bring all of that in line, because ultimately a lot of the people who make the policies, they understand what they want to do and why they want to do it. It makes sense at that level. How do you translate that down to what happens on the ground and the best way to execute that? And do you have the right kinds of resources or system to do it?
Exactly, and there's different levels of execution. You have the strategic level, which is, you're looking nationwide and what the national leaders want and how they want to influence. And you have the operational level, which is Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. These major operations that are out there. We think of it as a war, but it's truly an operation that's ongoing in that area, and how those feed into the strategy. And then you have the tactical, which is the division and below, that are actually on the ground boots on ground. No, the guys that are meeting the enemy and the guys that are meeting the locals.
Okay. Now, to get down to the sort of soldier's eye view of things, what's sort of the nature of the dangers? What kind of equipment does the enemy use against you?
Everything. Well, everything within reason. They've used dishkas, which are larger 50 calibers, larger grain 50 calibers than what we have. Russian anti-aircraft machine guns. They'd use those on people. Mortars, suicide bombers, IEDs. IEDs were the most dangerous to us. That's where we've lost the most. But the dangers weren't just from the locals. There was dangers in the terrain as well. One of my injuries, I've fallen off of 2 mountains. Didn't realize it until I came back and ended up going through the VA, but I broke my spine. I had microfissures in my spine. But again, rock up, didn't know about it, and continued on. One was towards the beginning of the deployment, one was towards the end. But I never realized that, and that I had actually damaged myself with that. There's, the animals that you encounter. I had to evac people for scorpion stings. They have large cats like mountain lions that are there. In fact, I was relieving myself, turned around, saw what I thought to be a large dog that turned out to be, a mountain lion. Luckily, he must not have been hungry because there's no way I could get my weapon drawn in time to protect myself. But there's, venomous snakes. There's lots of different things within the environment itself that can be dangerous. Not to mention, the laws of the road are almost non-existent. It's insane seeing the way that they were driving, and on the Pesh River, the fact that the road, this is really the last road you can truly drive down. You can be scraping the side of the cliff on one side of the vehicle while the tires are hanging off a 100, 200 foot cliff down to the river valley on the other side. So it's coldest I've ever been in my life has been up on a mountaintop where, I joke about it, and I was happy to be part of a manwich. But the dangers are all over out there. But the largest dangers were the enemy, and the largest danger was the IEDs. Especially to light infantry where you're moving around dismounted usually. Not much protection from an explosive when you're dismounted.
Right. And did they have kind of favorite ways of using IEDs, or would they deploy them? Would they just figure out somebody has to come this way, so we put it here, or?
They knew routes that we would take. You go into a valley. There's one way of usually coming out of the valley, especially if you're on foot. You can try and climb up and take other routes, but it's just truly not feasible. So you're just on higher alert. So they place them when you go in a valley. That's when they come out, and then place them when you're coming out of the valley. The Torkham Gate, the area along Torkham Gate, just across on the Afghan side of the border, reminds me of Times Square. During New Year's Eve, just stacked people, because that is the gateway to the east, right there. It's the Khyber Pass right there. Everyone, the old Silk Road would move through there, and that was the route that everyone would take. And again, no road laws. They'd set up camp in the middle of the road. It was just crazy, and they'd set off an IED, a fuel truck would be going through. They'd slap a timed IED on a fuel truck that they'd assume was on their way to a fob. Suicide bombers would run up at a checkpoint or run up at a group of soldiers. They would bury IEDs in the side of the cliff to try and push a vehicle off the cliff, at the route that they had assumed you'd take leaving a village. The methods were numerous.
Mm-hmm. And how good were you at anticipating or heading off that kind of threat?
Well, you always have to anticipate that there's that threat. Heading off, I think we were pretty good, considering that we were there for 16 months, boots on ground, always engaged, always with the locals, and the fact that we only had 200 Purple Hearts and only had 20 killed speaks to the fact that I think we're pretty good at that.
You remained a functional unit the whole time.
We did. Yeah, we did remain a functional unit the entire time.
Now, did you take replacements while you were there?
No.
Okay, so you just get smaller.
Yep. It was the other bad thing about going over as a unit is you have what you have while you're over there. You don't have that transition, and you have what you have while you're going over. You can request additional personnel, but usually you've got a known date that you're leaving. Nope, you're going to make do with what you have while you're there. We prepped a few people to come over. We brought over some people from our rear detachment to increase our numbers when we needed to. But usually our growth and strength would be people who would heal up from their injuries. You had a lieutenant that took a round through his knee, the back of the knee out through the front of his kneecap, towards the beginning of deployment. Came back to us a year later in theater. Granted, he wasn't very mobile, but yeah, it's we had a first sergeant, and probably shouldn't have came back. He probably was officially AWOL from recovery, but he took a shrapnel to the brain from a mortar round. We led his soldiers through the rest of the engagement, and then was evac'd all the way back to Longstuhl in Germany. Actually called the battalion commander from Longstuhl, said, "Sir, get me out of here before I kill somebody," and then went AWOL from Longstuhl, hopped flights back, and ended up back in the Pesh Valley, and told us that he was there with his soldiers before we knew he was coming back. Yeah, we had that. The biggest growth back in of our soldiers were soldiers that were injured who came back.
Okay, and then were there a lot of people who were like that sergeant in the sense they felt like their place was back with the unit?
Yes, there were a few people who truly did not want to be there and would have done anything to not be there. I had to court-martial a soldier who, in the middle of an engagement, sat down and said, "I'm not going any further." It took him out of the fight. It took the person who had to carry his gear out of the fight, and the person who had to carry him out of the fight, and endangered the rest of his unit. So yes, there were situations like that, but that was very few and far between. Only a handful of people had that type of mentality. He was the only one that truly put his comrades in danger. Vast majority of the soldiers, it doesn't matter why you join, doesn't matter why you go over. Once you're there, 99% of us are fighting for the same thing. The guy standing right next to you. And it's that sense of failure to not be there with them. That sense of you're letting your brothers down. You could be there to take care of them. This is also, in my mind, from my experience, where the survivor's guilt comes in as well. When my best friend was killed, I still have bouts. This was almost a decade ago, and I still have bouts of feelings of, I could have done this, I could have done that, to make sure that he was still here. Along with other soldiers, so I've sent soldiers on missions where they didn't return. I've sent soldiers on missions where they came back not the way they went out. Burns, injuries. That's something you live with, but it's as a whole, it's that same mentality throughout, especially in a close-knit group like that. It's you're there for the person next to you. So it doesn't matter what happens to you, as long as the guy next to you is going to come out of it.
Okay. Now you're there sort of as the signals officer for the battalion, but the battalion is operating kind of scattered across a large area. So day to day, in different phases of this deployment, what kinds of things are you doing?
Well, we'd anything from requesting additional supplies to keep the communications working and improving the communications, to throwing on my rucksack and going out with the colonel or whoever's going out on a mission. My soldiers, I'd set up retrans teams to retransmit the communications. And they'd sit out there 90 days at a time on the side of a mountain. Then they come in for a 48-hour refit and go right back out to the side of the mountain for 16 months straight. I had guys that were set up, even the ones that were on the tactical automation networks, the CPNs, the JNNs. They lived out away from all the comforts. Built up every time we built up a command post at one of our outposts. I made sure that I start moving in the networks there, and that was all part of movements as well. But there's quite often every single one of my soldiers were out on missions. It got to the point where it didn't matter what your mission was. You were the infantryman first, and you were moving through with the infantry, doing what they were doing while you're doing your job. It was one team, one fight. And the infantry would pick up some of the communications requirements as well. I had infantry guys that started manning those automations networks when I didn't have a signal soldier that I could throw in there. I'd request additional signal soldiers from the higher echelons, from the Bagram groups, where you go there, you see them in mass, and you ask for one or two, and you'd be denied to have another soldier come in from an outside unit. So we all assumed each other's responsibilities a lot. There were still key roles. The infantry were still the infantry. The 11 Bravo soldier was their main focus. My soldiers, their main focus was to keep the infantry soldiers talking. But again, the enemy does not differentiate between the infantry and the signal. So the vast majority of the time that they were out there they were indistinguishable.
And when you're putting them in these retrans points and other things, very small outposts, I know, did those become targets? Or did the enemy leave those alone?
Yes and no. It's an easy target, but after the first time they thought it was an easy target, and we hit them hard, then they realized that it was a hard target. They wouldn't be out there alone. They'd be within eyesight of a squadron. We always maintained oversight of those positions, and we'd get the ANA involved as well. We always try to include the ANA in everything that we did.
ANA being Air and
Afghan National Army.
Okay.
We tried to include them in everything that we did. Our fires officer would also plan targets as to where he thought that they would be attacking from. And so if one of those points that seemed soft would get hit, we would respond with everything that we had until they realized it's probably not a good idea to attack those anymore.
Yeah, I suppose part of it too is that to attack something like that, they have to basically use conventional weapons.
Yes.
They can't just use an IED because you're not moving.
Right.
And then but when they do that, then they become conventional targets.
Yes, and it makes it much easier. They've tried many different things to turn conventional weapons into unconventional weapons. Remote mortar. You put a block of ice within the tube and put a mortar round on top of the block of ice and wait for the ice to melt enough that it would actually hit the firing pin and fire the mortar on the target, and you could be long gone by then. Well, then they would lose it wasn't so much the tubes that were important as it was their base plates that had the firing pin in there, so they'd lose those. So then they were trying to come up with ways that they can fire and maneuver with the base plate. They come up with some interesting things, but that it's a land of MacGyvers. It's the best way of putting it. You give them bubble gum and duct tape, and they'll come up with an IED.
All right. Now, what impression did you have of the Afghan military forces that you were working with?
At the soldier level, for the most part, they were honorable and good people. They reminded me a lot of my soldiers. The problem is a lot of the leaders that they had out there, a lot of the senior leaders used to be warlords, and they're out there for themselves, whereas a lot of the ANA were out there for, their thought of a better life. So there were some bad units, but for the most part, the units we dealt with were good.
And could they do their job, like if they're involved in a cordon operation, did you have to worry that they would be leakier than yours, or?
Well, that they would be less competent.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the training or equipment that we have. On the other side, they didn't have the regard for human life the same as we did as well, theirs included. If you're getting fire from on top of a mountain, their initial thought is assault the mountain, whereas ours is put mortars or artillery on top of that mountain, maybe calling some airstrikes to soften it while you're moving to a position where you can hit them. Theirs is let's charge up that mountain, take the mountain. So different mindset, but again, the more that they were in, the more that they learned and coordinated, the better they became.
Okay. And did they have a policy of using people from different parts of the country?
Yes. Usually, that's one of the main differences between the police and the army. Was the police, especially the local police, they'd be people that grew up in the area, whereas the army, you'd have people from the south going up north. And they go home on leave. Some of them probably wouldn't come back, but especially if they weren't getting paid. And that's another problem with it, was the pay wasn't always steady. They could go a year at a time without being paid. But yeah, they would use them from all over the country.
Okay. Now you're there for well over a year. Now, do you get breaks of one kind or another?
Well, for a year deployment, you're supposed to get 2 weeks leave. And we were only supposed to be there for a year. We got our 2 weeks leave. I took my leave and right around the halfway point for what was supposed to be the year deployment. And so saw my wife when I went home on leave, spent some time with her, came back. When we were getting ready to go home after the year point, we actually had people in the air that got turned around when we got extended. And when we got extended, it wasn't a you're staying for this long, it was a you're being extended. We don't know how long you're being extended for, so it's indefinitely right now. So we've already been on the ground for a year. We've already had a lot of casualties. We took casualties after that as well, which was very bitter for a lot of people, me included. It was one of those, they shouldn't have even been there in the mindset where even though you're signing up, you're going to be there as long as you need to be there. There's still that nagging feeling of they should have been home, they shouldn't have been in that position, why? And it takes some time to get past that as well. But yeah, we had people actually in the air on the way home get turned around.
So what kind of impact does that have on a unit's morale?
Massive impact on the morale. But we had about a day or two where everything just, to use the term, everything just sucked. There was nothing good that could be said. It's our responsibility as the leaders to put on that face moving forward, saying, hey, okay, yeah, it sucks, but let's go do it. Bury down deep, though, this is how it affects me, how it affects my family, and I really don't want this. You have to bury it down deep and go forward with talking points of, Colonel Cavoy was very intelligent in how he came up with his talking points as well. Hey, we've been doing a very good job at this. There's a surge. If they had to pick somebody, they picked the right people because of what we've been doing and how successful we've been. You are the soldiers for this job. So it's that was essentially his talking points and how he went forward with that. And I still buy into that. That was why we stayed on, because there were other units that went home. Our division headquarters went home. There are other units that did go home, but I buy into we stayed on because we're the right people. But it's very astute of him to identify that's the talking points to have, especially with the mentality of the soldiers of we're here for each other.
Now, would they do things you get your 2 weeks actual leave and so forth? Would they also periodically rotate parts of the unit to rear area bases or things like that?
Well, you're supposed to get a pass to someplace like Cotter every so often in theater. I couldn't tell you what it is because none of my soldiers ever got it. The people who take those passes are usually the ones who are stationed at Bagram or Leatherneck or Kandahar, the people who are disengaged from what's going on the ground, because you can't, all the commanders on the ground, they can't afford to lose the soldiers because there's no other soldiers coming in. You're already losing them for the leave. And this isn't something where if you go with lighter group of soldiers that you're not going to be as profitable that day. It's you going with a lighter group of soldiers, you've got possibility of catastrophic failure that leads to loss of life and loss of mission. And no commander can look themselves in the mirror if they make themselves go into a situation lighter and end up losing soldier life because of that decision.
Because it's a different pattern from what they had in the Vietnam era, where people were rotating in and out for in-country R&Rs and
Right.
other kind of, and any given day you didn't
Well,
know
there
what
is
was going on.
R&R. That would it'd start after about month 2 and go through about month 10. They get a 2-week R&R. They rotate them through. But we're already getting R&R, so if you give them the pass that they're authorized as well, on top of that, you're 200 strength. And the soldiers realize that too. So they never really pushed that. You know, if we, as a leader, have to keep an eye on the soldiers and see who's getting close to cracking, who's having the issues, and pull them away from the things that were pushing them over the edge occasionally. The soldiers, they realized it, and that also led to a lot of the frustration with those rear echelon units, the ones that were at Bagram and elsewhere. Now, not only are they not being shot at and not being in immediate danger, and they're able to call home, but now they get the passes as well. So there is a lot of frustration from the soldiers that were in the fight to the soldiers that were supporting the fight.
Okay. Now, are there other things about that deployment that kind of stand out in your memory or experience here that we kind of haven't brought into the story yet?
Yes, there's things that do stand out. There's a few of them I'm not going to talk about. I still have some issues with a few of them. There's a few, and I haven't even talked with my wife about it. And she, you know, things I'll probably never talk to my wife about it because she doesn't need to know about that. Goes back to some of the worst things I've ever seen and would not wish on anyone. Almost makes you lose some faith in humanity to see some of that stuff. But I'll tell you that what pulled at my heartstrings the most were the kids and the animals. And I'm somewhat of an animal lover, but I'm a hunter too, so I consider myself average when it comes to treatment of animals. But the way some of the animals are treated there, and the fact that you have to go on patrols every once in a while when you're on FOBs to kill the dogs because they bring disease. You know, go out with a shotgun and shoot dogs when I've got a dog at home. You know, it tugs at your heartstrings. A donkey that was being used for packing equipment up. You know, can laugh about it a little bit, but you have to laugh at some stuff because the other option is, you know, just break down. You know, a donkey walked off, fell off a cliff, and donkeys scream when they fall. And what happened with some of the kids and happened with some of the families, and it just, stuff like that, you know, I have a son of my own. I didn't at that time, so it didn't hit me as hard, but now that I have a son of my own, I think back about some of the stuff that I've seen, it's just, it makes me want to go home and hug my son. And then the fact of losing soldiers as well. Like I said, my best friend was killed. I've never taken this off. He was killed October 31st of 2006. I've always had a hard time with Halloween since then. But Doug Sloan was a great individual, and I went and got therapy for it when I came back, but there's still that blame of self. What could I have done? He was killed from an IED. Part of what my job was counter IEDs to defeat that threat. Him, Forrest Ewan, was another friend of mine who was killed by an IED. It seemed like all of my friends that were killed from IEDs. The thing that was my job to defeat. So there's a lot of self-loathing and blame on myself for that. I've gone and I've got help for it. I had some PTSD, grief management issues. In fact, when I came back, you know, never told my wife a lot of the stuff that's led to that. She knows about Forrest and she knows about Doug. She knows about some of those. She knows all about Forrest and Doug, and Forrest and Sloan, and the fact that I changed so much when I came back. I wasn't the same person. I didn't realize it. She actually gave me an ultimatum when I came back of, you're either going to get help or this is going to be over. And I went and got the help. She didn't say it in so many words, but that's what she was leading up to, and it took her a while to finally get it through to me that way. So when I went and got help, I'm able to deal with it now, and it doesn't really affect me as much as it used to. There's times where it gets a little overwhelming still. It's those are some of the things that have stayed with me.
Yeah.
There's some positive as well. I've got some friends that I've become very close with. Mike Beltahar is a great friend of mine. He lives in Rochester, New York. He was our S4. And he and I became very close while we were over there. I've seen some of the worst that humanity has to offer, but I've also seen some of the best. And that situation brings out both sides of people, and you find out truly what people are after being in those situations.
Yeah, and one of the stranger things about doing the work that I do here is sometimes I will get somebody suggest to me that you must be pro-war. And I think about listening to soldiers like yourself, people who really seen what war is. You people don't know much about what you're talking about, do you? And it's ugly, but at the same time, it's a world where we still need a military and we still need soldiers, and you're still in. So.
I actually was planning on getting out when I came back after that deployment. I joined the National Guard to shorten my time, and I came here, went and joined the civilian world a little bit, worked at Target, and just realized that wasn't for me. I couldn't look myself in the mirror and say, I'm making a difference. What I'm doing is for the benefit. If I have a good day, profits may increase very, very slightly. If I have a bad day, they may decrease very slightly. But those decisions, you can't go from making life or death decisions where a whole theater a whole strategic plan may lay on a decision for someone so fresh out of college. There's something that's called the strategic specialist. That soldier who can either demean someone or respect them. It has such far-reaching results, and I think that my training, my experience, and the reason why I came back into the military after planning on getting out was I felt I had something that I could offer that could be for the positive and maybe improve some lives, if not save some lives down the road.
All right. So now you get to, so when do you actually finish that deployment?
That was June of 2007.
All right. And you come back here, and then you said you go off of full-time duty for a while then, and sign up in the Guard, and so forth.
Yep, I became a commander for the FSC for this battalion. I was planning on only spending about a year and then leaving, and thought that I would be going to the civilian sector, and I went to one of the large businesses, and it just didn't feel right to me. Whereas every time I came into the armory and was around soldiers and doing what I had been doing, it felt right. It felt like I was doing the right thing. Target was a great place. They were supportive people, very nice, but I couldn't live that way. And my wife knew I wasn't happy, and so she said, we're not going to continue until you go do something that you're happy with. So that was all part of the get yourself help conversation as well. So I thank Target for giving me the opportunity to work for them, and I went and taught at the ROTC for a little bit before I got hired on full time into the National Guard again as an AGR.
Now, when did you then start up again full time with the Guard?
That was 2009.
Okay.
I started with the ROTC in 2008, a little over a year, about a year and a half with Target. It was late 2008, and then April 2009, I I started full-time here in this battalion. Actually, I've been here for a while, so it's about time that they're going to be moving me soon. But and as a commander and then in staff here, and I think I've made positive impact with the battalion, because when I came in, they were just essentially going from a detachment to a full battalion size. So again, another major change in an organization when I'm first coming in. And we recently, well, a little over a year ago, came back from my second Afghan deployment with this battalion.
All right. So well, between the time when you join the battalion and when you go to Afghanistan again, what kinds of duties did you have here?
I was a company commander, and then I was the assistant S3, and really those were the two main duties. I mean, as the assistant S3, I did a lot of different roles. But there was a time where the entire staff was me as a company commander filling in as a staff officer. My immediate boss, now Major Sean Abbey, but at the time was Captain Abbey, was the battalion OIC. 2 lieutenants and a warrant officer. That was the entire staff for the battalion when we were trying to build it. So really, we built this battalion from scratch. So I've got a lot of, this is the other unit that I feel true affinity with, the 132, which I've been through some of the greatest and some of the worst moments of my life, and the 507, which I've helped build from the ground up, and I take a lot of pride in that. That doesn't mean that the 507th was stood up, and that's just where it expanded from.
Right.
There had been a 507th Engineer Battalion before, but it was only a detachment. It wasn't a full staff like it is.
And what range of things does the 507th do? Engineers do a lot of things.
Yes, we have a vertical engineer which builds buildings upwards. We have a horizontal which builds runways and roads. We have an EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit. We have a sapper, which are essentially infantrymen with shovels and explosives. We have firefighters, and for a time we had the signal company that's in this armory that was under us, as well as our FSC, a field support company, which do all the logistics for the battalion. So a lot of different tasks, but when we deployed, what our mission was route clearance. So we had vertical and horizontal and sappers all rolling together into route clearance.
All right. So when does the second deployment happen?
The second deployment was from 2012. This year, that was we left May of 2012 into March of 2013.
All right. And this time, what area of Afghanistan were you operating in?
South and southwest. And the difficulty on this one was much different from my first one. It was tough being away from my wife on the first one. And I love her a lot, but the harder thing was dealing with what we were dealing with over there. She was always in my mind, but it wasn't the tough issues that I had to deal with on the first one. The second deployment, the most difficult thing was having to leave my son behind. And my son was born in 2010, so he's only 2 when I left him. So it's trying to get him to understand that Daddy's going to work and Daddy's going to be gone for a while. It was just it was very difficult. Something I did not have to do on that first one. And when I came back, he was excited to see me. It was great. And while we're standing in formation, my son's slowly walking out to me while we're in the formation for our welcome home ceremony. It was the best feeling in the world. I picked, but he made it to me and reached my hand out, and he was almost afraid to touch my hand. He was curious as to who I was and excited to see me, but also I wasn't familiar with him. I wasn't familiar to him anymore, which was very tough because a third of his life I was gone.
Right. Now, while you were gone, did you have access to larger bases so you could actually have video communications so we could at least see you? Or?
Yes, this last time it was much easier. I actually paid for network while I was over there and brought with my iPhone so I could FaceTime with them. I called them almost every night. We weren't. I became what I loathed on the first deployment. I was that guy that sat in that leatherneck for the first half of the deployment. The second half I went up and I actually, great experience for me. I became part of a joint staff up in RC West I worked with the Italians, the Spanish, the Lithuanians. There's a true multinational force up there that I worked with. Has our battalion stretched all through southwest to the west. Is a huge area, about half of Afghanistan almost. That our battalion was responsible for clearing the roads. But yeah, that I was able to talk a little less on that second half when I was up with them, but I was still able to keep in constant communication with my family. So it made it easier, but it's one thing to be able to see your son, over a screen and see your wife over a screen. It's another thing to be able to hold him.
Right.
And, while I was there, I wasn't out. I never got shot at on the second one, which to me, great. I never truly felt my life was in danger on the second one, which again, great, But the fact that we go out, when I went on, I put myself out on a couple of missions just so I could stay in reality as opposed to being that rear echelon individual that would push out guidance without knowing how it affected soldiers. I made sure I went out on some of those so I could truly know what they were going through. When I go out and I'd see some of the kids and some of the families that remind me of some of the stuff that I had encountered on my previous deployments, and knowing my son at home and knowing I couldn't go give him a hug when those memories rose up, it's just very tough, very difficult.
All right. Now this deployment goes. It's less than a full year. Was that the original plan?
That was the original plan. You're gone for a year total. That includes the train up at mobilization station before you go, and the demobilizing, going through all the medical process and the paperwork at the mob station on the way home. So it's a year total.
Okay. I guess with the first deployment you had, the impression is that you were making an impression, but because of the way the system worked, maybe that stuff wasn't lasting. So it's hard to tell what that is. Now, how do you characterize the overall success or whatever of the second tour? Did you kind of accomplish the mission and leave, or?
We accomplished our mission. It's I don't know how far to go down this rabbit hole here. You can see one thing, but you can see as a whole where we're not going to do what we originally set out in Afghanistan. It's very disheartening to see that, especially knowing what I had gone through the first time and what some people I love most in the world sacrificed for. You're going through that, and they're making a sacrifice with the understanding that we're going to meet this mission. We're doing the right thing. We're moving in the right direction. And I guess it's not as simple as looking at my two deployments. You have to look at the whole thing. We come back, and within that first year, we're hearing that they're pulling out of the Weigel, which is where Doug was killed. Mm-hmm. When we went into the Weigel, we were the first ones going to the Weigel. They thought that we were Russians because they hadn't seen any of the coalition, and we weren't speaking Pashto. Mm-hmm. And so they thought we were Russians going there. They were initially afraid of us until we won them over, and we're, it was actually when Doug was killed, the elders who never really got together all came down to Camp Blessing further than they've ever gone in their life to attend his memorial. Mm-hmm. And we had made such great strides to the 173rd, and I'm not going to say anything really bad about the 173rd because they went in with their own plans. But there was a situation, and the leadership went through and got in trouble for it. But Iranis getting overrun and having soldiers killed. If that never would have happened, the way we were interacting with them. Hmm. But then the viewpoints changed and priorities changed, and resources started getting pulled out of there. And when that happened, that valley that Doug died in, we never went back into. Mm-hmm. And then we started pulling out of the Korengal, where all these other individuals like Forrest was killed. We pulled out of it, never went back into it again. And so slowly you start seeing everything that you fought for starting to go away. We're still succeeding in the overall mission, but not in the way that you anticipated. So the second deployment was it a success? Yes, it was a complete success for what we set out to do at the beginning of that deployment. From where I was on my first deployment, was it a success? Not as much, because everything that we'd sacrificed for and everything that we're building towards, it's completely changed, and we're taking a different approach. I understand that, you know, due to the change in circumstances, we had to adjust with it. You know, a plan only lasts until you start to execute it, and then it completely changes. We understand it. I get that, but the fact that we thought that we were going to win over the locals, that we were going to win over the government and legitimize them. To the fact where, while we were there, it's a given that the corruption was prevalent. It's a known fact, and you take that into account in the planning that you're dealing with corruptness. It's disheartening, because you know, at the average Afghan, they're not. The people I dealt with on my first deployment, you know, it hurts me to say that there's corruptness, even though it's true, because knowing them, they don't want that.
That's just the system. I guess with the second deployment, I mean, you were basically trying to kind of open or keep open main roads and communication lines.
Yes,
and
we were extremely successful there. Our find rate was through the roof. We only had one company, and I'm not going to go into detail on them, that we truly did not succeed, and they became more of a liability than anything else, and we overcame their shortcomings, and that all came down to the leadership within the company. The soldiers were great, but the leadership just wasn't there, and we overcame that. But even with that, as a whole, we were extremely successful. We maintained the lines of communication. We made safe routes for the most part. I mean, there's some that we just gave up on because there was absolutely no way of maintaining it. But it was all part of the closing down of the FOBs as well. We went from the first mission of legitimizing the Afghan government to the second one, which was being coalition focused. Coalition to include training up the Afghans and advising them. The soldiers we worked with were great. We didn't, you know, while we were over there, that's when the rash of Afghan soldiers or Afghan police trying to kill coalition. But again, it goes back to how much of that was from that individual not having the mindset that I had from the beginning, that we're dealing with people and dealing with a different culture, and forcing them into that situation, because to them, honor is everything.
Right. So you're not being treated with the right kind of respect, then.
Yeah, exactly. So why would I want to cooperate with you if you're going to disrespect me and my way of life? So somewhat I can see where they're coming from without agreeing with what happened.
Okay. Now we have closed out our... Okay, we've kind of worked our way through sort of basic discussion of your second deployment, and I guess that was essentially divided into two halves. In the first, you were doing kind of a lot of coordinating of the communication with the units that were out doing the road clearance,
Yes,
essentially.
I planned out all of their missions. Essentially, it was on me to identify what routes needed to be cleared through my coordination with all the other units that would be using them. The readiness of the units, you know, who just came back from a mission, who's ready equipment-wise and personnel-wise to go out again, and then I would assign them. I would build out all the plans for the missions, and then I'd bring it to my boss, the Battalion S3, for his approval, and then push out the orders to the units. So I did all that planning, and then I would plan out any resourcing that they would need as well to, hey, we got this broken piece, we need to get out here, and I would do all the coordination to get the pieces throughout the battlefield. So that was my plan up front. Was my job up front was to plan all the movements, all the operations, and the get the support for them out to them.
So it was a job that really kind of necessitated you staying with the headquarters most of the time.
Yes, I had to stay in there. The only times I could go out where I could only go for 2 or 3 days at a time. Back to, if you remember back at the beginning of the interview and my first deployment, I'm the type, I love to get out with the soldiers. I'm happiest when I'm with the soldiers, and when I'm not, I have to do something that keeps my mind focused on what they're doing so I can keep my expectations grounded. I don't like being stuck behind a computer. And I know the higher up I go, the more I'm going to be stuck behind the computer and in the planning room, and the less I'm going to be out on the ground. I get that. That's as I see it, my sacrifice now is away from the part that I love most, which is being with the soldiers executing.
Right.
And then, the second half was a great experience for me. I've never had experience like that. I learned some Italian, learned some Spanish, and learned some Lithuanian while I was with them. Made some friends while I was over there, but the key thing that I took away from that was how they planned, how they coordinated. The key difference between, a lot of the Western militaries, we have, our way of thinking as a whole is similar, our technology is similar, but the key thing that separates us from some of our partner states and nations we are results oriented. The U.S. military is results oriented. I don't care how you do it. This is the end state. This is what you have to complete. Whereas many of our allies, they are process oriented. You said you were going to follow this process. You need to follow this process. Well, the end result is the same. What's the issue? Well, we were planning on you following this process, and our plan revolved around that. But this way saved money and probably some lives. But the plan was for this process, and that was the biggest thing I had to overcome with them, was that difference in results against process. The Russians used to say the Americans were the hardest military to plan against because we have all these regulations and policies that we never follow. But we're results oriented. Back when I was at the first half, I was dealing with the Australians and British. I interacted with them a lot as well, so I got to deal with them. They're much more Americanized than they like to admit. They are very results oriented. So Southwest, where it was the Anglosphere in the Southwest, there it was very results driven. And then when I went into much more of the older European portion, which was the Spanish, the Italians, even the Lithuanians. The Lithuanians are much more Americanized. So when I dealt with those guys, it was like I was at dare camp.
Yeah.
Same jokes, same type of personalities. So they're very Americanized. But the Italians and the Spanish were very process oriented. It was very difficult wrapping my mind around the results are still important, but not as important as what process you're following to get there.
All right. And then, so you come home from that then when?
We left, what time, when was that? It was March. We were leaving in March. We came back to Texas, and we went through our out processing in Texas, and then we flew home to a welcome home ceremony. The out processing was a little over a week of going through paperwork, going through medical examinations, capture anything that might be wrong. The issues I had with the first deployment, my back, the hitting my head and all that, which I didn't really get into, but the other things where I injured myself, we never had, that true out processing when we came back. We came back, it was release us back to the family, and there we are. There wasn't okay, let's go through, capture all the injuries, all of your paperwork, make sure your pay's all straight. This time it's, we really didn't like it, but it was good for us. It's there for two reasons: to decompress, so you don't go home and go for, especially the soldiers that were out, and go from high stress situation to family life, which could lead to bad things. And as a leader, I'm really glad we did that. On the other side, making sure that we capture all the medical issues to make sure that those soldiers are taken care of in the long run. Make sure that we capture all the pay issues and get it all transferred over, and do all the administrative functions of moving you from being deployed back to your guard job. So we did all that there, and then we flew home to our welcome home ceremony. And, you know, welcome home ceremonies, all the soldiers always say, it's, you know, once you're out on the ground, it's for you and your families, but the ceremony as its own is for the VIPs and the bigwigs that show up, because the soldiers, you arrive at the welcome home ceremony is the same way on both of mine. It hasn't really changed. It's always been, you know, the dog and pony show for the politicians and the higher echelon officers to be able to officially welcome you home and get their face out in front of a community. You know, the soldiers, as soon as they get back in the state of Michigan, or as soon as we got back at Fort Drum, we wanted to go see our families. You know, at Fort Drum, flew in, got in a bus, they bussed us to an area, and they roped us off, and we couldn't cross the rope, go over to our family until we went into the gym to the official welcome home ceremony. So there was a divider between you and your family. All you wanted to do was go see your family, but you had to wait for all the distinguished visitors to show up so that you could march into the auditorium for the welcome home. You know, I get it. You know, it's also a face of the military for the community. It goes to what we were talking a little bit off camera of getting that message out there of the soldiers are home. Here's us reuniting them with their family. So yeah, it speaks politically for individuals, but also speaks towards, you know, politically for the military and winning hearts and minds back stateside as well. Because it makes a good story when you see the soldiers walk into the gym, when the families all stand up and applaud and the kids run out to their parents. Okay. It makes a good story to put out on the news. But the soldiers, it's not for the soldiers or the family, because they truly, all they want once they get on the ground, let us go, let me go see my family.
Yeah. Now, back in the Vietnam era, when people came back, or Vietnam, they came back as individuals, not as units most of the time. They just usually, very commonly, are discharged very quickly, and then they're just out in society, and there you are, and not much of any particular support offered. And that's how it started with these deployments as well. They come back, and it would just be family would meet you at the airport or wherever. That progressed slightly to the family would meet you at your unit's headquarters. They'd bus you to the unit's headquarters and release you to your families at the unit's headquarters. To, let's go to the brigade headquarters. They bus you to the brigade headquarters, and now you start getting a little formality, because before it was the captain that was holding his soldiers up from the family, and no captain is going to stand in the way between, you know, a staff sergeant and his wife that he hasn't seen in over a year, or his girlfriend that he hasn't seen over a year, or this sergeant first class and his 4 kids that are running out. No captain's going to stand in the way of that, because the captain wants to go see his wife or his girlfriend or his kids. But once you get to the brigade, now all of a sudden you got the rank that's there, and with the higher the rank you got, the more formalities need to be there. To where I agree that there needs to be a ceremony to welcome them back and officially thank the soldiers, and to put it out in front of the community so they realize that there's been a major sacrifice and we're reuniting the soldiers. That's a great story to put out there to sell what we're doing and show that we're people as well. It's a great story to put out there. It's just, I wish that there was a way to shorten that time. I know you can't have the ceremony without the soldiers on the ground. And there's a process of soldiers are used to hurrying up and waiting. So the soldiers will wait for the last of the distinguished visitors to get there, and then we'll go through. I just wish that we could shorten that somehow. Maybe if I gain some more rank, I can do that on future deployments. We'll see. The second deployment I have to touch on as well a little bit is there was no leave on the second deployment. Leave went away, partially to do with funding. They identified that flying soldiers home for their 2 weeks of leave was costing the government too much money.
So they canceled the leave, and it was, that's something that did not go over well with the soldiers at all. At all. It's I'm used to being away from my wife. My first deployment, that second portion after I saw her, was longer than the entirety of my second deployment. So we understood it. Didn't affect us as much, but it's something that did not sit right with any of the soldiers involved. It came to one of those where a couple, the money is worth more than we are to you, and that was the perception. There's something about arriving for leave at the Atlanta airports and being recognized as you're walking through the airport to get on your flight home. Which when I flew home on my leave for my first deployment, my flights were actually delayed and then canceled. And once you hit Atlanta, you're already on the clock for your 2 weeks. You have to report back on a certain date. So any delay is time away from your family. And when I got to O'Hare, my flight was canceled, and they said, well, we'll get you on the next one in the morning. And a businessman who overheard me explaining, I'm already on the clock. If I wait till morning, that's one more day I have to spend away from my wife, and one fewer that I can spend with her on my leave. And he said, well, I was just going to get a car for the way home. Do you want to ride? I'm going through your area on my way to Detroit. I could drop you off. And so he took me home. But there's that, when you go home on leave, you get that appreciated feeling for the soldiers, and it really picks them up. That some of these soldiers, where this deployment was their first one, they truly didn't get that appreciated feeling, because all they got truly from that deployment was the welcome home ceremony, which in their mind was a dog and pony show. Just let me go see my wife.
Right.
Whereas they weren't walking through the community while they were still serving, and have the people recognizing them and thanking them, and showing their support. And a lot of these younger soldiers just didn't get that while going through the same thing as the people who were authorized to leave.
Okay. And there is also the issue, once you do get back to the States, you got to readjust to civilian life and the rest of it. And do you think it works better for soldiers who sort of stay in the Guard to kind of have that foot
Yes.
still in the military?
It works much better for them. I'll tell you that the National Guard soldiers, as a whole, not every individual, but as a whole, are more mature than active duty soldiers. Partially because the average soldier is older in the National Guard. Partially because they hold down another job in the community and they bring other experience to it. Whereas the soldiers in active duty, that's all they know. They go in, all they know is the Army. The Army controls every aspect of their life. National Guard, they do it as a part-time job unless they're called up for whatever reason. So they have to bring all the additional responsibility. There's not that cushion of being employed full-time for the active duty. There's not that assumed support network. So you have to be much more self-sufficient in the National Guard than in the active duty. And with that self-sufficiency does come more responsibility and more maturity.
I guess also a lot of the active duty ones, they may be in for one hitch and then they're out.
Yeah.
And so there's not that continuity. You can still see people that you deployed with and that.
And a lot of them become National Guardsmen and reservists, so they bring that additional experience from the active duty into the National Guard and reservists as well. So that's why I think it is easier. It doesn't so much have to do with the culture as with the type of person that's in there. I know it sounds funny that I'm separating between culture and the type of person in a culture, but the Guard culture, when you're in, it's the same culture as in the active duty. It's just fewer times a year. That's speaking from experience as well. We expect the same out of these guys when they come in. It's just for shorter periods. But the individual is completely different than the individual that's in the active duty.
All right. Well, you got a pretty remarkable story, and you do a good job of telling it. So I'd just like to close out here by thanking you for taking the time out of, because you're actually on duty right now.
I
the rest of
am.
that,
Soldiers wait
to be talking to us. All right.
But thank you.